Before we begin the program, I do kind of just want to start with some webinar reminders. So we do want to request that everyone that is participating either as a speaker or as a participant to change their naming convention to the one shown on the screen above. This will allow us to kind of better capture your registration details and kind of get to know where you're coming from. And so we will give everyone just a moment to do so. So yeah, thank you. And if you are unsure how to change your naming convention, what you can do is just click on top of your face on the screen. There are some 3 dots. At the very bottom, you will see the button that says rename. So feel free to do that.
Sorry, which of the 3 dots?
So there's 3 dots when you, so hover over your name on the screen. There are some 3 dots to the right of your name. And then when you click that, you should be able to see at the very bottom, rename. At the very bottom.
Got it.
And if you're having problems, our team, Josh can do it for you as well. So he'd be happy to help.
Sorry.
You can let them know.
But we're going to start until get you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and for joining our Business Opportunities Seminar. My name is Kayla Slobodnik. I am one of the co-hosts this morning. Before we begin, we just have a couple of reminders. Today's session is indeed being recorded, a copy of which of the recording and the presentation materials will be available to you after you have completed the post-event survey. We'd also like to remind you that audio and visual settings for participants has been automatically disabled. However, we will make sure that you're able to have access and participate during this virtual event during the Q&A portion. Please be sure to send your questions as well in advance to the chat box should you want them to be read aloud during the Q&A portion, or raise your hand at that time. And if you do kind of lose contact, please feel free to just re-enter using the webinar link. We will make sure you are able to rejoin us. And we are certainly happy to welcome you today. We're happy to welcome all of our bank presenters. Thank you for joining us. I am also joined by my colleague Lily, and she is joining us from the Embassy of Canada in China. She is your co-host. And we are happy to have you. So just this morning, our agenda, our opening remarks are being led by Dr. Dawn Bobiash, our Executive Director for Canada at the Asia Development Bank. We will then also have 3 presentations from our bank specialists, Stephen Goldfinch from the Asia Development Bank, Marilyn Tolosa Martinez from the World Bank, and Julia Polycarp from the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. We will also have a Q&A session moderated by Senior Trade Commissioner at the Embassy of Canada to the Philippines, Guy Buelo. And then we will have closing remarks by Ambassador David Hartman, also from the Embassy of Canada to the Philippines. So in terms of the objectives of today, we want to ensure that you are able to gain a greater awareness of climate response and disaster mitigation priorities here in Southeast Asia, with a particular reference to the Philippines. We want to ensure that you have a better understanding of the IFIs, of their expertise, and of the technologies that they are also looking for. We also want to provide you with, a platform to engage with IFI sector specialists, learn about their procurement processes and any tips and tricks that they may have. And we want you to be able to pursue actionable projects and understand what's coming down the pipeline from them. This is also an opportunity to learn from peers that have also bid or have not have had experience with IFIs before. Also to learn from us, your trade commissioners that are in the embassies of Canada worldwide. So thank you very much for joining us. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Donald Bobiash, Executive Director for Canada at the Asia Development Bank. Don, over to you.
Good morning. And good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, Kayla, for that introduction. I hope you can all see me. Everything okay visually there? Great. So greetings from Manila. I understand that a number of Canadian infrastructure and clean tech companies, representatives from Export Development Canada, the Canadian Commercial Corporation, provincial offices, and Trade Commissioner Services colleagues in the region, and from across Canada are with us today. On an introductory note, an introductory Canadian note, on my morning drive to the AIIB headquarters, I pass not one, but 2 Tim Hortons. This is an excellent example of how Canadian firms are succeeding in Asia and kicking butts in a highly competitive environment. I would also like to acknowledge our speakers from the Asian Development Bank, especially my colleague Stephen Goldfinch and representatives of the World Bank and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, as well as the Trade Commissioner Service team. During my career in Global Affairs Canada, I've enjoyed working with the Trade Commissioner Service, both in headquarters and in missions around the world over many years. All I have to say is that you guys rock. Since last September, I've had the pleasure of representing Canada at the Asian Development Bank. Tackling climate change, building climate and disaster resilience is one of the AIIB's operational priorities set in its Strategy 2030. IFIs like the AIIB are scaling up to support in these areas. The AIIB is dedicating financial resources to support developing member countries in these areas, and we are also making sure that climate change and disaster risk management are mainstreamed in operational strategies, country programming, and project design. We are working to augment developing member countries' expertise, access to technologies, and are encouraging the knowledge sharing and learning opportunities. Today, you'll be hearing from IFI experts. They will highlight their programs and activities in climate resilience and disaster risk management, and you will have an engaging Q&A session with them afterwards. Before we get started today, I would like to share my thoughts and observations for Canadian companies and other event participants in considering how best to pursue IFI procurement opportunities. IFIs are good business partners and present significant business opportunities. They are constantly looking for new suppliers, technologies, and more efficient ways to address their challenges. IFI opportunities are very competitive. It is essential that you learn about IFI procurement processes, priority sectors, and project pipelines, and invest in building relationships, and I'll be talking more about that. Companies are encouraged to leverage their support and services of IFI liaison offices, or what we call OLIFI teams, within Canadian embassies in the region. These offices represent one of the biggest competitive advantages that Canadian companies have. One of my most important observations is that to succeed over the long term, you need to develop a relationship with key contacts in the banks. It is the relationship that is key to understanding how the bank works and how to access opportunities. It is important to identify the contacts who are experts in your area or targeted country and region. So get to know your contacts and send them chocolates and flowers. Learn about their favorite sports teams and movies. Ask about their families. Build a personal relationship. If you don't schmooze, you lose. Second, as planning for IFA projects and other spending moves at glacier speeds, you need to be patient and look to the long term. You need to identify how projects are planned and approved and start early in the process. Also, you need to think local and consider who could be your local partner, as most of the project tenders require local expertise. Success with IFI procurement, like with so many other business activities, requires an investment of time and resources, a long-term commitment, and patience. The reward makes it worthwhile, as the experience you gain from one FI will benefit your pursuing of other opportunities in other institutions. Let me conclude that there is tremendous potential in working with the IFIs. Their priorities, climate, the environment, infrastructure, are Canada's priorities, and money they have. In closing, I would like to congratulate Kyla and Guy and other organizers of this event for what I know will be a great initiative. Thank you, and over to you, Kayla.
Thank you, Donald. We really appreciate your time. I hope everyone looks forward to hearing from our IFI speakers as much as I do. But before I pass the virtual floor over to our first speaker and to my co-host, Lily, I would like to encourage all participants to send in your questions to the chat box once again. Our speakers will address the questions during the moderated Q&A session, which will follow immediately from the three presentations. Now, I will hand the floor over to my co-host, Lily. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Kayla. Kayla, can you hear me?
We can hear
okay.
You. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you. And I now would like to start our presentation session. First, if I may, I would like to invite our first speaker, Stephen Goldfinch from the AIIB. Stephen works at the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department at AIIB as the Senior Disaster Risk Management Specialist. Stephen supports developing countries across Asia and the Pacific build climate and disaster resilience, recover from disasters, and find solutions to better reduce and manage disaster risk. Prior to joining the AIIB, Stephen worked for over a decade at the United Nations, both in the field with the UN Development Program and at headquarters in New York with the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. He holds a master's degree in Peace and Conflict Studies from the University of Sydney and a bachelor's degree in Asian Studies and Political Science. Stephen, thank you very much for joining us today. May I now pass the virtual stage to you?
Thank you, Lily and Carla, and thank you to Canada for the opportunity to present a little bit on what AIIB is doing. And I trust my presentation is up on the screen there. So thank you for that kind introduction, and again, thank you for the opportunity. And thank you to Edie Bobiesh for his remarks as well. I think that really helps set the scene. So my presentation today is going to focus very much on AIIB's climate and disaster risk management approach, and I hope that provides colleagues on the call with insights into AIIB's portfolio and into how we how we engage in climate and disaster risk management. So let me get started. I'll provide an overview of the challenges and AIIB's response. We'll touch a little bit on some financing modalities, mobilizing finance, and then I want to touch on some sector projects to give some examples. Of course, these change projects are constantly coming up, but I think they'll give you a flavor of what AIIB's portfolio is currently looking at. So let's start with where we are, and I think this is a sobering picture, but really helps set the scene. This is what the region's faced since 2015 in terms of disasters triggered by natural hazards. So AIIB's developing member countries are among the most vulnerable in the world. We face significant disaster risk. Frequency and intensity of those natural hazards are increasing in response to the impacts of climate change. And, you know, I just want to flag here that the figures for 2022 don't even include the damage and the loss from Pakistan and floods, the Pakistan floods in the middle of that. So as you can see, this is an underestimation, but even as an underestimation, it's really sobering, I think, to see what our member countries are dealing with. So AIIB recognizes its central role and is committed to supporting our member countries tackle climate change, to build climate and disaster resilience, and to enhance environmental sustainability. That's our operational priority 3 under our strategy 2030, which will bring us through to 2030. The operational priority has 3 core pillars. The first is increasing mitigation of climate change. So there we're looking at supporting the implementation of countries' nationally determined contributions, NDCs, and really helping them to reduce GHG emissions through projects and programs. The second pillar looks at building climate and disaster resilience. We take a comprehensive approach here. We take an integrated approach. We see them as complementary issues. So it's really about assessing risk and then looking at how we can support countries to build resilience. And then the third area is on enhancing environmental sustainability. And here we're looking at everything from environmental management, pollution control, investing in natural capital, conservation, food production, you know, really covers the entire gambit. I also want to flag here that AIIB has recently engaged in ocean health and coastal marine resource management. This is a new area for us and an important one. So to implement this operational priority 3, our approach is very much, as I said, to take an integrated approach. So we work with our member countries on programming and pipeline development. It's looking at clean energy, clean technology through AIIB projects, expanding private sector engagement, promoting access to finance is critical, and employing a very structured, systematic and evidence-based approach. So bringing the science and the best information we have to underpin all of our project interventions. And then I think, you know, AIIB's value addition, in addition to the financing side, is very much around knowledge, capacity building, and partnerships. And so that's really central to our role there. In terms of our targets, these are our high-level commitments. AIIB is the region's climate bank, and as such, we place significant emphasis on reaching these commitments by 2030. So we have a huge increase in climate finance between now and the decade. AIIB is aiming to spend 100 billion of its own resources on climate change from 2019 to 2030. The pace needs to increase. We recognize that. We're averaging around 5 billion a year so far. So that means we need to increase it to 11 billion a year from now on. So that's a significant increase. What lies underneath these figures, I think, or these targets, is recognizing that we need to have a big scale up in finance for adaptation and resilience, not just about mitigation. Looking at increasing private sector finance, how do we leverage the private sector to support the region and meet its commitments? And then Paris alignment, critical. So all of our AIIB sovereign projects will be Paris aligned by July 2023, so this year, and then all operations, sovereign and non-sovereign, by July 2025. So to give you an understanding of what this means in practice, I've broken it down into kind of 3 levels, upstream, midstream, and downstream. So the upstream refers to the legal, regulatory, policy environment. So entry points for AIIB are in our country partnership strategies. These are our 5-year strategies. We have dialogues with our countries to set the agenda for the 5 years, and include things like policy-based lending, so we are able to address and improve structural issues in the country. Midstream efforts, this translates into legal and regulatory issues, looking at planning and processing. So From ADB's perspective, it could be around specific sector plans, blended finance, risk assessment. And then, of course, at the downstream level, it's very much around the pipeline development, so investment projects and technical assistance. To complement this, this engagement at these different levels, there are kind of three broad entry points I want to flag here. So upstream engagement with the private sector, critical. More and larger investments in adaptation, and really looking at those enablers. So those enablers are around capacity, knowledge, and partnerships. It's not just about finance. We really need to work with our member countries to increase their capacity, their understanding to make those necessary decisions. So moving into ADB's disaster and emergency assistance, our offer is clearly articulated in our 2021 policy. Our area of engagement is very clear. So on the ex-ante side, it's about reducing risk and preparing. And on the ex-post side, it's very much around recovery, reconstruction, and build back better. So ADB is a development bank. We have a development mandate that guides us, but we also recognize that we have a role to play in conflict, humanitarian FCAS situations by complementing humanitarian assistance actors that they work that they do. So again, very much taking a development approach, but recognizing that we live in a very uncertain and complex region at times. So how does this translate into portfolio? ADB finances both standalone and embedded climate and disaster risk management projects. So standalone projects are like your flood risk management projects, your retrofitting, that's where the primary purpose is really on climate adaptation and risk reduction. Embedded projects are where you have, a sector project, a road project, an energy project, but then there's a clear entry for adaptation or for risk reduction. And this can include both structural and non-structural measures. And I think this is particularly relevant when we're talking about nature-based solutions, bringing the great sources, bringing it all together. So to give you an understanding of our DRM portfolio for the last 5 or so years, we don't have targets given the nature of disasters. However, we do want to see a trend of projects within ADB that have DRM features. And I think that trend is increasing. Last year, 45% of the 229 ADB finance projects had DRM features. And that's important because if you go back to that first slide, the level of risk the region faces and how climate change impacts are manifesting for many of our member countries is through increased disasters. So it's really critical that we look at how we can mainstream disaster risk management, climate adaptation across our portfolio. Let me shift to mobilizing finance. Now, this slide's quite packed. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but I wanted to give you a sense of how ADB works to mobilize climate finance above and beyond our regular finance that I mentioned before. And so I'll come back to some of these examples, but what we're essentially dealing with is a market failure when the private cost for emitting is lower than the social cost. So although carbon pricing is one way around this, it's not there yet. So we need to look at other ways of addressing this. And it's not just about mobilizing more finance, but also more concessional and grant financing, which we can then use to subsidize or to de-risk investments to promote climate action. So really ADB is looking at ways to make its spending more concessional in the climate context. I want to give a couple of examples here. So we have the Climate Investment Fund, which is the largest, which provides rather large-scale, low-cost and long-term finance solutions to support countries achieve their climate objectives. So ADB administers half of the 6 funds in this region, in the ADB's region. And most of this comes from the sovereign side, but we are expecting that the non-sovereign side will continue to grow in importance. The Green Climate Fund, GCF, is another big source of concessional finance. The GCF plays a critical element of the Paris Agreement. It's the world's largest climate fund, and it supports member countries raise and realize their NDCs, their nationally determined contributions towards low emission climate resilient pathways. So ADB has administered almost $100 billion worth of GCF financing today. Sorry, on the financial sector, I want to talk a little bit about kind of innovative areas in the financial sector. So we know that the development of the finance sector in Asian Pacific still lags substantially behind that of other developed economies. We also know that the finance sector contributes to climate mitigation and adaptation through risk assessment, through forecasting methodologies, as well as innovative risk transfer solutions, so thinking around insurance and other instruments, to support decarbonisation and financially resilient societies. So the development and use of innovative green financing approaches and instruments, and here I'm thinking around green bonds, sustainability-linked bonds, ESG, green banks. These are some examples. And also, I guess, on the financing of sustainable agriculture, supply chain, value addition. This is blue financing. These are other areas through blended financing platforms where we're seeing really positive and encouraging signs of climate action within the finance sector. And I think disaster risk financing is another important area, and particularly relevant to the industry of the insurance industry. The private sector is another part of the story, and we have an ambitious private sector program with important finance targets. And let me give you some examples here. So in Vietnam, there was the 144 megawatt wind farm that actually increased the capacity, wind power capacity in Vietnam by 30%. So really a very significant investment, really quite transformational when you think of the energy mix in Vietnam. Capacity building in climate smart cocoa and coffee farming, financial literacy and Indonesia and Tunisia as some other examples, perhaps further down the value chain. And then on climate finance for financial intermediaries, AIIB has worked to provide financing for development for affordable and sustainable housing in Georgia. So they're just some examples of where our private sector operations are heading. Shifting back to the disaster and emergency side, I just wanted to show this slide to give everyone a clear kind of picture of where AIIB comes in on the continuum. So on the left, there you've got the risk reduction and preparedness. So that's kind of the ex ante, the regular side, right? And you've got relief, early recovery, reconstruction. So AIIB has lending modalities, and you'll see those in black, to cover the spectrum, and funding equally to support under countries across those interventions. In terms of the ex ante work, the bank has the Asian Development Fund, and this provides AIIB's poorest member countries with grant financing to incentivize projects that reduce climate risk and build and support climate adaptation. And we're going to touch on some of the projects in a moment, but I wanted to just flag this because I think it's an important source of funding. It can't be used for climate proofing, so it's very much about how do we advance innovative projects that might not otherwise be funded. And I think this is a good example of where AIIB is playing that role to incentivize action at the country level that might not otherwise happen, try and speed up action on risk reduction and adaptation. On the response side, I won't go into this in detail, but just to flag that, as the first slide demonstrated, our region faces many disasters that call for reconstruction and recovery finance. AIIB has provided significant finance over the last, since 2004, I think it's close to 8 billion. And so our role is very much to support the reconstruction and the rebuilding of high priority physical assets and to restore economic, social, and governance activities. So these loans are fast tracked. They normally approved in around 12 weeks, and they come to the request of the government. And it's very much about taking the I guess realizing the silver lining that from an unfortunate event. How can we support countries to build that stronger, to build that better? And this is very much and address some of those structural issues, some of those underlying drivers of risk as well. That are there. On the financing side, this is also part of the Asian Development Fund. This is a set aside, and it provides funding above and beyond the country allocation to respond to disasters triggered by natural hazards and health emergencies. This is for our poorest countries. And for countries that are receiving cross-border flows of displaced persons triggered by conflict and humanitarian events. There's a formula and eligibility criteria, but essentially some of our so-called Group B countries are then able to receive grant resources to support the hosting of those people. So let's move into some of the sector project examples, because I think this will provide some idea of ADB's portfolio and practice. So just to kind of set the scene, ADB committed 6.7 billion of climate finance last year. 60% of that was on mitigation. That was down, I think in 2021, around 72% was on mitigation. And the remainder of course goes to adaptation. The largest sector was the transport sector last year, which was around 40%, with agriculture and natural resources being the largest sector for adaptation. So with that, let's just touch on some of these. So these projects, you know, there's a lot of detail here. You'll receive the slides, so you'll be able to go through this. But I think if you go back to my earlier slide on those 3 entry points, then, you know, on the upstream, the midstream, the downstream, this is very much reflected in how these projects are designed. So here we have the coastal, the sustainable coastal and marine fisheries project in Cambodia. So at the upstream, it's really around coastal management, midstream, looking at food safety and value chain addition, and at the downstream, landing site infrastructure, working with community fishing organizations, 60% adaptation finance, and very strategic projects given the fisheries, the state of the fisheries sector in Cambodia at the moment. In Bangladesh, we have the Coastal Town Climate Resilience Project. So this project is very much around building the resilience of secondary cities, of coastal towns. So here we are improving municipal infrastructure, so making sure that it's resilient to existing climate risks, disaster risks rather, so thinking here around, you know, cyclones, inundation, floods, but also recognizing that, you know, Bangladesh's coastal areas are the most vulnerable, some of the most vulnerable areas of climate change. So building that in, recognizing that livelihoods are a key part here, so supporting the resilient livelihoods and strengthening, so here's the value addition, right? Strengthening the institutional capacity and the governance capacity of local governments to manage all of this. Tonga is another example. Here we have an integrated urban resilience project. So this one we did in collaboration with Australia's DFAT. They provided the preparatory funding. It's a flood management drainage project with significant climate adaptation finance. It's linked here to the climate and disasters and urban strategy and investment plan that's in place. So it's very strategic in that sense. And it's really also building, you know, community-based DRM. So it's both at the top end and then really at that lower end. And here there's, you know, drainage civil works. Actually the civil work was intended over the next 12 months, just to flag that. But, you know, it's a very much, again, a combination of your structural and your non-structural. Turning to China, this project is on Sponge City. So I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with the term Sponge City, but essentially it's a term used in China for mainstreaming and integrating urban and rural water resource management into urban planning. So it's very much around having an integrated planned approach to managing water, and also ensuring that you've got good use of green and great infrastructure systems, that you leverage the ecosystem services that are available as much as possible, and that you're able to both prepare for flood, but also for drought, right? Because in this region, both are very present. So it's very much an integrated planning, nature-based solution, livability type project. And again, covers the full spectrum of interventions, particularly around the green and road infrastructure systems of flash. There's some photos here before and after, but I'll leave you to look at those later. Another project in China, this is the first rapid bus transit or BRT line in the city here that connects major urban areas. It's part of a very clear strategy that the government has for the city. Again, it's not just about the buses and bus lanes. It was also looking at livability in terms of bicycle and pedestrian networks, creating small streets and green lanes, improving water supply, waste management. So very integrated approach, recognizing that climate impacts, disaster risks require, you know, a really comprehensive approach. And these projects provide those entry points. And I think I have some photos here as well through the sea and really interesting in a bit of work going on in China. Moving to Central West. So this is a road project in Uzbekistan. So classic road project, it's upgrading the road with climate resilient features, sustainable bioengineering. But then again, at that upstream or that midstream level, it's also looking at the introduction of overloading control and predictability systems. So bringing those two critical parts together. So these are, we've included these, and this is really for you to look through after this, but this is the portfolio of technical assistance. Technical assistance plays a really important role in creating the enabling environments, laying the foundations for, for the pipeline of projects and making sure that our projects have the most impact. So everything from building, understanding and capacity of government officials through to designing instruments, risk transfer instruments for countries, looking at how we can support them to implement their policies. So it really covers a lot. But again, really, these all lead to investments essentially, right? It's all about creating the groundwork for investments or for better management of investments. And then I just wanted to flag a couple of openings. So obviously these changed frequently. These are the ones that are up right now. And I guess it just gives you an idea of where things stand. AIIB is scaling up. There's a lot to come. There are a lot of opportunities as we continue to meet our really ambitious climate targets. So I really hope that this has provided you with some insights. And I will pass it back to Lily. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Now I would like to invite our second speaker of the day, Marilyn Tata Tolosa Martinez, Senior Disaster Risk Management Specialist at the World Bank. Ms. Martinez manages a $300 million investment project on seismic risk reduction and resilience, and co-manages a $500 million DRM development policy operation. Ms. Martinez also supports the implementation of ongoing technical assistance on climate and DRM. Before joining the World Bank, she worked as an international development professional. She has over 18 years of operational experience in DRM and resilience, urban development, local government development, municipal finance, water supply and sanitation, and urban transport. She has worked extensively with different teams in the Philippines, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Vietnam, Kiribati, Papua New Guinea, and West Bank and Gaza. Ms. Martinez received her master's degree in development economics with distinction from the University of the Philippines, Diliman, and a master's degree in public management from the University of the Philippines in the Visayas. Marilyn, thank you very much for joining us. May I now pass the virtual stage to you?
Thank you, Lily. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to present the World Bank support, specifically to the Philippines on disaster risk management. Please allow me to start my presentation with a brief context of the Philippines. So the Philippines is one of the most disaster-prone countries in the world because of its unique geography. Currently, it ranks #1 globally for having the highest disaster risk, and this is based on the World Risk Index report of 2022. Around 60% of the country's total land area and at least 74% of Filipinos are vulnerable to multiple hazards. The country has been experiencing very strong and highly destructive typhoons almost every year in the last 10 years. And it is also vulnerable to earthquakes, tsunamis, floods, landslides, and volcanic eruptions. Climate change and public health emergencies are compounding the impacts of the disasters. Now this slide shows the series of disasters that lead to major policy reforms in the Philippines. Among the key milestones include the Climate Change Act in 2009 and the Philippine Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Act in 2010. These two laws provide the legal and institutional foundation for strengthening the country's capacity for disaster risk management, mainstreaming disaster risk reduction, and climate change adaptation and mitigation in development planning. Reforms have been put in place by the government because of lessons learned over the years, and this is in part also supported by the World Bank through development policy operations, investment project financing, technical assistance, analytical work, and knowledge exchange. Now, disaster risk management is a key priority area of the World Bank in the Philippines. And it is actually mainstreamed in generally in all projects and operations of the World Bank. Now, the World Bank support is focused on building disaster and climate resilience from three angles. First is physical resilience, interventions that aim to prevent, withstand, and recover from the harmful impacts of disasters. Second is financial resilience, ensuring the population is financially protected in the event of a disaster through tailored strategies that increase the ability of the national and local governments, homeowners, businesses, agricultural producers, and low-income populations to respond more quickly and resiliently to disasters. And third, the third one is social resilience, helping households, especially the poor and the vulnerable, to cope with shocks through adaptive social protection mechanisms and other support. Now, our support to the DRM takes different forms. We have risk-informed planning, disaster risk financing, development of resilient infrastructure, preparedness for reconstruction and recovery, capacity building, and knowledge exchange. Now let me discuss our interventions related to physical resilience. First, we are supporting the Department of Science and Technology in promoting access and use of the GeoRisk PH in generating integrated hazard and risk analysis needed to inform development planning, policy formulation, and investment programming. The GeoRisk PH platform is initiated by the Philippine government and is the central source of risk and hazard information in the Philippines. Now, as part of the GeoRisk PH initiative, we support the Office of Civil Defense and the Department of Science and Technology in building the capacities of local governments in the use of the GeoRisk PH and how the hazards and risk data can be integrated in the local disaster risk reduction and management plans. The capacity building support that we provided benefited around 450 technical staff and from 150 provinces, cities, and municipalities across the country. Now, we also have a program we call as Ready to Rebuild. This is a flagship capacity building program of the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council for pre-disaster recovery preparedness. We trained officials and technical staff from more than 325 provinces, cities, and municipalities across the 17 regions in the Philippines in developing rehabilitation and recovery plan even before a disaster strikes. The rehabilitation and recovery plan is risk-informed. It uses hazards and risk information from the GeoRisk PH platform. Now, almost 1,200 local chief executives, DRM officers, and technical staff benefited from this capacity building program. Now, the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council and the Office of Civil Defense have taken ownership of the program and created a web page for Ready to Rebuild information. The web page has a resources section where Ready to Rebuild references can be downloaded. This platform allows us to share insights on pre-disaster recovery planning with a wider audience. To further assist the local governments in developing their disaster rehabilitation and recovery plans, using science-based information, and help the Office of Civil Defense manage the efforts of at the national level, the DOST Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology, in collaboration with the World Bank, has developed the PlanSmart web application. The PlanSmart web application is an automated planning tool that empowers local governments to formulate their rehabilitation and recovery plan faster and improve decision-making and planning for pre- and post-disaster events. It leverages on the GRIS-PH platform and the Ready to Rebuild program. Through the web app, LGUs have tools that will enable them to access and process data-driven information relevant to DRM planning in a timely manner. So we are rolling out this training program to 5 vulnerable provinces or regions, including Metro Manila, Central Visayas, Caraga, Calabarzon, and Bicol. We are also supporting the development of PlanSmart Safe Schools, which customizes the PlanSmart web application according to the needs and priorities of the Department of Education. It is a vision that the application will be used for infrastructure planning, investment programming, and asset management. And it will also be used for school-based contingency planning. Now, other than providing capacity building support, we also have an investment operation. So in anticipation of the possibility of the earthquake in Metro Manila, what we call as the big one, the government and the World Bank prepared the Philippine Seismic Risk Reduction and Resilience Project. This is a 300 million project that aims to enhance the safety and seismic resilience of selected public buildings in Metro Manila. And enhance also the capacity of the Department of Public Works and Highways to prepare for and respond to emergencies. The project expects to intervene in at least 425 public buildings, mostly schools, that will benefit around 300,000 people or children. The project has 4 components. Component 1 supports retrofitting of public buildings, preparation of feasibility studies, detailed design, and quality assurance. Component 2 finances the procurement of emergency response equipment for transport and mobility restoration and communication, as well as capacity building for emergency preparedness and response for DPWH. Component 3 supports project management, and component 4 is a contingency emergency response component, which allows the reallocation of loan proceeds in case there is a disaster. Now, this project that I currently manage is implemented by the Department of Public Works and Highways. In parallel, we have technical assistance on safe and resilient school infrastructure. This initiative aims to assist the government in identifying intervention options, priorities, to reduce the vulnerability of school infrastructure against earthquakes, typhoons, and flood hazards in selected regions outside of Metro Manila. Key activities include establishing a baseline and inventory of school infrastructure, inspecting a representative sample of schools, conducting vulnerability and risk assessment, preparing intervention options, and developing prioritization framework based on the results of the assessment. The technical assistance also includes risk communications, knowledge sharing, and dissemination activities. Now, we also provided technical assistance to the Department of Human Settlements and Urban Development in preparing post-disaster shelter recovery policy framework, which focused on identifying an integrated set of post-disaster shelter recovery interventions based on the different phases of a disaster. We also work with the department in the preparation of a resilient housing framework and the transition plan for the transfer of the Emergency Shelter Assistance Program from the Department of Social Welfare and Development to the Department of Human Settlements and Urban Development. Now, let me now move to financial resilience initiatives. So a key milestone in the country's efforts to increase financial resilience was the adoption of the Disaster Risk Finance and Insurance Strategy, which the bank supported under a program that we call as the CAT-DDO. That was in 2015. This strategy aims to maintain the sound fiscal health of the national government, develop sustainable financing mechanisms for LGUs, and reduce the impact of disasters on poor and vulnerable households while shielding the near poor from falling back into poverty. Following this DRF strategy, the government adopted what we call as a risk layering approach, which aims to minimize the cost and optimize the timing of the post-disaster response. The strategy includes annual budget allocations to the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Fund, including quick response funds, contingent financing from development partners as pre-arranged loans that can be accessed in time of a crisis, a catastrophe-linked bond that transfers catastrophe risks to international capital market and provides quick funding in case of a predetermined severe disaster event. And then the last one is a public asset insurance program to improve insurance protection for strategic high-risk national government assets. So for DRF instruments, we have what we call as the DRM Development Policy Loan with a catastrophe deferred drawdown option. We've started this in 2011. We also had another one in 2016 and then 2021. And we are currently preparing again another one that is planned to be delivered this year. So the CAT-DDO is a contingent loan or a standby credit facility that could be disbursed immediately and used by the country for emergency and recovery needs without reallocating the budget from ongoing programs. The CAT-DDOs that we implemented with government provides us the platform to pursue reforms in the different aspects of the DRM system. A key feature of the CAT-DDO is that upon the declaration of a state of calamity by the government, by the Philippine president, the World Bank can disburse the funds within 48 hours. And recently, we had a drawdown from the facility as a result of the declaration of state of calamity due to Typhoon Paeng. Now, this slide simply shows the progression of DRM and climate adaptation reforms through the CAT-DDOs that were implemented since 2011. Then we also have what we call as a parametric insurance. This is a type of insurance whose payouts have been predefined based on modeled losses. This instrument provides immediate liquidity upon meeting a trigger, and its payout use is not restricted to reconstruction purposes. Now, in 2017, the Philippines launched parametric insurance worth $1 billion or around $20 million to insure 25 vulnerable provinces along the eastern seaboard against typhoons and earthquakes. This program was upsized in 2018 to $2 billion or $40 million, still covering the same provinces, but the Department of Education was added as a beneficiary of the proceeds. In 2021, payouts were made in the amount of 2 million and 26 million following Typhoon Ompong and the earthquake events in 2018. Then we have the catastrophe bond, which is a form of financial protection for losses from earthquakes and typhoons within a predetermined period. It transfers risk related to natural disasters to the capital markets. Payouts are triggered when an earthquake or a typhoon meets the predetermined criteria under the bond terms. In the case of the Philippines, a payout was made in January 2022 in the amount of 54.8 million following Typhoon Odette. If you have questions about the parametric insurance and catastrophe bonds, please let me know. I can link you with our team that's specifically working on disaster risk financing. And then the final area of World Bank support is on improving social resilience. We have worked with the Department of Social Welfare and Development in the implementation of adaptive social protection measures and mechanisms during disasters, and this include the emergency cash transfer program in the disaster-affected areas to provide support for rapid early recovery and rehabilitation in the aftermath of a disaster. And also the implementation of the streamlined guidelines for disaster response operations modality under the National Community-Driven Development Program. Now, we are also working with TESDA in mainstreaming disaster and climate resilience in construction-related technical, vocational, educational, and training courses. So I will stop here and happy to address some of your questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn. I would now like to invite our third speaker of the day, Julia Kugleit-Porikop, Climate Change Specialist at the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Ms. Porikop leads the bank's climate adaptation policy and strategy, as well as overseeing its adaptation investment portfolio. She is responsible for ensuring climate resilience-related assessments are incorporated into investments across various thematic priorities and sectors. Prior to joining the AIIB, she worked at the Green Climate Fund, conducting assessments of its public sector projects, and the Ministry of Environment of Lithuania, managing its special fund for climate change. She has a master's degree in environmental studies from the University of Sydney and has over 12 years of experience in international development, climate change, and project finance. Julia, thank you very much for joining us today. May I now pass the virtual mic to you?
Yes, thank you so much, Lily, and I hope everyone can hear me well. So before I start my presentation, just to also echo our keynote speakers saying that there are a number of opportunities to work with the MDBs, and to also just say that we have Tim Burtons in our offices in Beijing. Here in the AIIB, you can see a picture of our facility. So very happy to have the opportunity to speak here and present on what we do at the AIIB on infrastructure and disaster risk financing. So just a quick overview. I will speak a bit briefly on AIIB as a new development bank among the MDBs. I think it would be interesting for participants to hear about our core mandate and what are we doing in terms of our focus investment areas. I'll also speak briefly on our experience and track record in disaster risk financing and resilience and climate finance. I'll also touch on the InfraTech platform, which is an interesting platform we are developing here in AIIB. And I'll also present briefly on the project procurement opportunities and the procurement requirements when working with AIIB. So who we are an infrastructure investment bank. In Asia, our primarily core mandate is to support infrastructure for tomorrow, which really means that we are financing green infrastructure with sustainability, innovation, and connectivity at its core. So we are really an infrastructure-focused development bank. How do we do that? Well, we are a client-centric, we are innovative, and we are really customizing the different investment solutions that are requested by our clients. And we do that through facilitating support and working with our clients in the different infrastructure investment areas that improve the global and regional sustainability. What do we mean by infrastructure for tomorrow? Well, we expect that all of our projects are environmentally, financially, economically, and socially sound. So this is really the sustainable infrastructure mandate, which is core to all of our investments. And we also believe that the infrastructure for tomorrow really unlocks new capital, new technologies, and new ways to address the various challenges we face today in Asia, particularly climate change and resilience. A quick overview of our cooperations, and even though we are an Asian investment bank, we also have non-regional members, and some of those are in Latin America as well as Africa. And highlighted here are our member countries in the Southeast Asia region. A bit on our also investment operations and focus. So we are working in core 4 sectors, which is energy, transport, water, and urban infrastructure development. We have a sovereign lending and non-sovereign lending arms through our 2 dedicated departments on banking and infrastructure, including social infrastructure department. And besides to providing loans to our countries as well as private sector interested borrowers, we are providing equities and guarantees. Now, in terms of our investment operations, to date, we have approved over 200 projects worth almost $40 billion, and our investments span across a number of countries. As you can see here, even though the largest investments are in India, we also have a number of investments in Southeast Asia, including Philippines, Vietnam, Cambodia, and others. We also have particular targets when it comes to climate finance. So under our corporate strategy, we have committed to financing 50% of all of our total investments towards climate change mitigation and adaptation by 2025. And that would equal to an estimated $50 billion by 2030. We have already last year reached our commitment with a target of 55% of our investments supporting climate finance. Last year, of that, 19% was dedicated for adaptation finance and building of resilience. We have also committed to be fully Paris aligned, just like our peer MDBs, with a commitment to be fully Paris aligned by July the 1st, 2023 this year. And that's also supporting, the direction and the opportunities that we seek in the investments that we're doing. In terms of our investments in resilience and disaster risk financing, since we are a new MDB and only really started to disburse and fund projects since 2019, we really don't have a very huge track record in disaster risk financing, but we have some interesting projects that I will speak to in a minute. So we have selected some examples here that speaks to disaster risk financing and resilience building. So one of the first projects we financed in disaster risk financing area was the Turkish project on seismic risk mitigation and emergency preparedness. So we've provided a $300 million loan to Turkey, and the objective of that project was to support the city of Istanbul's resilience against potential earthquakes. And the project had 2 key components. One was the emergency preparedness, with the provision of support of different emergency equipments, such as IT technology, water storage tanks, power generators, emergency vehicles, etc. It also had some public awareness and training components embedded in it. And the second component was on the seismic risk mitigation and support for public facilities, which included rehabilitation, retrofitting, and reconstruction of about 100 public buildings in the city of Istanbul. With that project, we were expecting to reach 120,000 direct beneficiaries. So we really believe this project had a very strong impact on supporting Turkey's efforts to withstand earthquake shocks. The second project that I wanted to also speak to, which is in Southeast Asia and Philippines, and it's a Metro Manila flood management project. In fact, it was financed together with the World Bank colleagues, and the AIIB provided a over $200 million loan to the city of Manila. The project really focused on supporting flood management, solid waste management, capacity building, and rehabilitation of the drainage systems in the city of Manila. And it really resulted in improved and 56 critical drainage areas and support of rehabilitation of over 11,000 hectares of land in the metro city of Manila. The third project that I would like to also speak about, and that's one of the recent projects we've done in the flood emergency and rehabilitation field, was in China. It was financed back in 2021. The project is a large project, meaning its total financing is over 1.3 billion, of which the AIIB funding was over $1 billion, and the project was supporting different activities across the three municipalities of Chengdu, Xinjiang, and Guangzhou. And the project was really a comprehensive urban development project, which was targeting different activities such as rehabilitation and reconstruction of damaged infrastructure in water, flood, urban, and transport sectors. The project was indeed triggered by a significant flooding in the province of Henan, which resulted in our intervention and our investment in this field. There's a significant impact. We were expecting that the project will reach a total of 20 million direct beneficiaries, and really will support a comprehensive rebuilding and reconstruction of the project areas affected by floods in China. Now, I would also want to speak a little bit on a different activity within the AIIB, which is seeking to support and help the different companies and governments to improve and work on the infratech or digital infrastructure field. So we've launched the so-called infratech platform within AIIB, and what it really is, it's a kind of go-to tool for different infrastructure collaboration that would be supporting and facilitating different financing solutions for our core mandate, which is the financing of infrastructure. So this platform is facilitated by AIIB, and we really expect it to help the different companies and governments and others who want to understand more on the potential of technology and information technology to support infrastructure. So we have different fields and areas under the platform, which includes the knowledge and capacity building, and also different information and knowledge pieces, such as the G20 Digital Infrastructure Compendium, which was led by AIIB and which was published last year, and can be also freely accessible and available online. There are different events and forums and infratech business networking activities, which we are also supporting. And so we're inviting different companies that are working in this field to present their solutions that they believe would support for better infrastructure financing in the areas that we are working in here in AIIB. So it's an interesting platform, which we are also actively promoting. So just wanted to provide some information on this, because it's also linked to how different companies that are working in the startup field, incubators, accelerators can work with us. So it's really kind of an ecosystem of different activities that can support the technology companies. It can be an exchange platform, and it can also be a go-to interesting option for different investors to see how they can link project ideas with what we can finance, and the different companies that can also provide their solutions in the field of infrastructure and technologies. Now, a little bit on the project opportunities, in particular on the procurement opportunities with AIIB. So AIIB finance projects that has a number of opportunities for working for different companies. We do that through the tender notices that are published on our website. The eligibility is really open and broad for participants in different countries worldwide, including suppliers, contractors, and consultants. You can also sign up to a newsletter where you receive updates and information on the current procurement opportunities on our website. And if you go to the website, you will have a list of different projects and different procurement opportunities there. So kind of just to emphasize as well that the first go-to stop and an opportunity for different companies how to participate in different tenders within AIIB is really through the projects that we are financing, and you can learn about the projects, including those that are just in the idea stage already on AIIB website through our project summary documents, and there you will also learn about who are the financiers, what are the project scope, and what in which countries those projects are, and all of the other relevant information. We've also recently published our annual procurement report, where you will be able to look through the different information on the types of procurement that we have done in the past, since 2016 up to 2021. And it will also give you a good hint as to what type of works we have been contracted since the beginning of our operations. So again, a bit of a snapshot on overall procurement of different categories, including goods, consulting services, and works that we've contracted since the beginning, which equals to over $12 billion. And 94% of those contracts were awarded through a competitive tendering and selection process. And you will learn more on the types of requirements that we have under our and I look forward to a discussion during the Q&A session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julia, and many thanks to our entire panel of experts from the AIIB, the World Bank, and AIIB. We really appreciate your time today. Once again, I would like to remind all our participants to send your questions to the chat box, or you can raise your virtual hand. Now, I would like to call onto the stage our Q&A moderator, Guy Boileau, Senior Trade Commissioner at the Embassy of Canada to the Philippines. I would also like to invite all three of our presenters back to the stage, as well as Mr. Glenn Harris, Senior Procurement Specialist from the AIIB. I believe we also have Mr. Liu Yunlong and Mr. Ignatius Santoso from the AIIB on the line. Guy, I believe you are now ready to start the Q&A session. Over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lily, for that. And thank you to you as well, Kayla. Really great to be amongst all of you. Sincere thanks to all of the presenters this morning for what I think are very complimentary presentations in terms of plans and priorities for each of the IFIs. What I'll try to do, if you allow me, is just to quickly summarize some of the key takeaways that I've jotted down on each of the presentations, and then we'll move to the Q&A session. And so from the AIIB presentation, of course, we heard about the three operations priorities, mitigation of climate change, increased climate and disaster resilience, and environmental sustainability. We've heard about the importance and the increased importance of climate finance and increased private sector finance to help reach climate change objectives and commitments. And we also heard about the AIIB's work to mobilize climate finance as well. The AIIB touched on its disaster and emergency assistance policy and the four principles supporting that. And one of the statistics that's jumped out at me is that in how in 2022, 45% of AIIB finance projects had disaster risk management features in them. So it just speaks to the scope of this area. From our colleague, Ms. Tolaza Martinez from the World Bank, who spoke in quite some details about the realities here in the Philippines and how the Philippines is the first country with the highest natural disaster risks worldwide. When we hear about volcanic eruptions, typhoons, which are happening at an increased intensity, flooding and earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, and so this is a country that has a significant need in this particular area. She spoke about the World Bank strategy for the Philippines and how it has shifted towards a more proactive risk management policy centered on three specific areas: physical resiliency, financial resiliency, and social resiliency. And very much appreciated the concrete examples of capacity building initiatives that have taken place and that are taking place here in the Philippines, including in the pre-disaster recovery preparedness. And finally, of course, from our colleague from the AIIB, who gave us a really great overview of the AIIB and its mandate, and spoke about the infrastructure for tomorrow, right? And how it's based on sustainable infrastructure from an environmental perspective, financially and economically sustainable, and socially and inclusive sustainability as well. Our colleague spoke about the areas of investment operations, investment opportunities in energy, transport, water, and urban, and gave specific examples in those areas as well. And very much appreciated the information on the digital infrastructure tool that is being used by the AIIB, and of course the information provided by in terms of the procurement process. And so with that quick recap, I'm sure some of our listeners in Canada, which is the evening right now, so I do appreciate all of you logging in at night. This is great. And some of you, I'm sure, are asking about having access to these presentations, which you will have access to the presentations. After the end of this webinar, you will be prompted to fill a quick survey. And as soon as you do that, then we'll be able to expedite the presentations to all of you. So there's various ways of asking questions. We received questions through the registration portal, so I'll touch on those at the beginning. And of course, through the chat box, please do keep them coming. This is a great opportunity for all of you in Canada and our Canadian colleagues outside of Canada participating to really ask questions to the experts. And so this could be done through either the chat function or raising your hands and just asking the question verbally as well. So with that, perhaps I'll start with a very quick practical question to all of our participants. And it's just in terms of the posture of your bank right now in terms of the post-COVID posture. So have all in-person events, in-person meetings resumed at your banks? Are the operations of your banks now kind of pre-COVID, back to pre-COVID days, or are you still relying heavily on virtual missions, virtual conventions and meetings? So perhaps I'll start with our colleague from the World Bank.
Thank you, Guy. For the World Bank, we still have the hybrid work approach. We can go to our office, and then we can also go to all government offices. This is only in the Philippines, but yeah, we have the flexibility of using the internet platform as well as face-to-face. Thank you.
Fantastic. How about yourself, Julia?
Well, we're very glad that here in Beijing, we're back to normal, and there are no more requirements to quarantine, and therefore we are fully back to traveling missions, and indeed we do a lot of on-site visits for the project that we're financing. So we were able to do that for the projects within China previously as well, but now I think everyone is really using this opportunity to be out there, and we've been engaged externally with the different stakeholders we have, and we've been on missions both as a speakers and as well as different project related on-site visits and due diligence type of missions. So yes, we're fully back to working as if there was no restrictions previously.
Music to our ears. And how about yourself, Glenn?
Yeah, man, we're back to normal here, with the exception that now we're trying to catch up on all the missions that we postponed. So it's very, very intense in terms of traveling. But no, it's all fairly much like it was before the pandemic.
Perfect. Okay, no, great. That's great to hear. From the Trade Commissioner side, it's the same. We are using, of course, a hybrid approach when it makes sense, but we are back to, I'm not sure if I could use the term normal, but more, of course, face-to-face interaction, which is great. So one quick question that we received prior to the webinar, and I'll just read it out loud as received, is how are climate response and disaster response strategies and tactics, including private industry? So perhaps if I can paraphrase this, to what extent is the private sector included or considered in the development of your various strategies pertaining to climate response and disaster response strategies? So perhaps I'll start with you, Glenn, if I may.
In terms of interaction with the private sector and what we're doing, I think our main consideration is, supply chain, in terms of, we're trying to achieve X, Y, and Z, but is there the supply chain to produce that? And that's both from a people's point of view, consultancy, but also in terms of material. So, for example, green cement or green steel, per country, do individual countries have the capacity to supply those elements through our project, or will there be a price implication? So it's a case by case, and we look at it in with both respects, both from the materials perspective and also from the people's perspective. I hope that answers the question.
Perfect, thank you. Julia, how about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, guys. So I think maybe I could kind of differentiate this based and provide the response based on really, the type of financing that we're providing. So when we do projects to our sovereign clients, which is basically the governments, right, or the municipalities, in the event that the projects are really kind of a large urban development infrastructure type of projects, of course, it touches on the different private sector priorities in a sense that, it is the infrastructure itself will, of course, support, the activities of the private sector. So it would kind of create the enabling environment for the private sector to then introduce the different activities that they can do. But when it comes to the different investments we're doing with our non-sovereign clients, which is really kind of the private sector operations and the private sector stakeholders within the different countries, this is really where we're like I said, we're kind of client-centric. So we're really listening to what their needs are, their demands are. And I'll give an example with the recent developments in Turkey. We've been approached by a Turkish bank that requested a loan from AIIB that could support the post-disaster recovery of the private sector operators and clients in the region that was affected by the earthquake. So kind of, in that sense, we are really tailoring our support and helping them to address the specific need that is emerging, that is affecting not only government and its efforts to rebuild the infrastructure, but it's also helping the private sector organizations and companies working in those regions to get back on track and also to resume their activities in those areas that are affected by the earthquakes. That's kind of an example that I could also give.
No, that's great, Julia. Thank you for that. How about yourself, Marilyn?
Just two things from me for private sector participation. One, we work with the International Finance Corporation, IFC, the World Bank financing private sector arm. In terms of investment with private sector participation, that's one. And then the second one is in terms of the enabling environment for the country, we work on pursuing reforms that would help the private sector to participate more, especially in pursuing climate and disaster resilience. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Another question, and mindful of who's joining us today in terms of Canadian companies, is what would you say would be some of the main challenges regarding procurement opportunities in your specific banks? And here, what I'm talking about perhaps is, are there in your work, are there specific, I'm not sure this is the right term, but oversights or errors that disqualify companies when they participate in your procurement processes? And thinking of it from a practical perspective, and whether the procurement process at the end of the day is all about price or how price is kind of weighed against, let's say, quality. So any thoughts on that in terms of practical advice that for companies that might consider jumping into it and participating in some of your procurement processes? Can I perhaps start with you, Julia? I'm just going to keep you on your toes, and I'm just going to go and ask the first question to different panelists. So over to you, Julia.
Sure. Thanks. It's really a very good question, and I'll try to answer it. And I think we have a procurement specialist on the line if he wishes to add something. But when it comes to challenges, of course, I mean, first and foremost, given that we are an infrastructure investment bank, most of our procurement is related to infrastructure type of biddings, which often are large and complex in nature. So I guess that's kind of the starting point where the complexity comes in. But having said that, there's always a possibility to do consortiums. There's also a possibility to kind of have, a different firms coming together. So that there are options for some small size procurements as well. But most of the procurements are indeed quite complex and really kind of infrastructure specific. But I guess some other challenges is, of course, we wish our companies to apply to the tenders and provide the necessary documentation that proves the qualifications. So I guess the qualifying elements and making sure that whatever we're asking for is actually met often is also a challenge. So really it's important to kind of emphasize your strengths when you are submitting your tender application to kind of meet all of those qualifying requirements. So sometimes that may be a challenge, and of course we're there to help and answer any of the questions if the firms reach out to us with some specific requirements. But of course, again, to underline that it needs to be done by our AIIB procurement policy. But also wanted to say that even for the projects that we're financing that are not that are done through our kind of private sector operations, those are undertaken by the rules and regulations of the company, the private sector company that is launching that bid. So those terms may be different, and in that case, we really encourage those companies to speak to those who are launching those bids and seek to check whether they can qualify, what specific requirements those particular private sector firms launching the bids have, and that may also be maybe some smaller size procurement bids that they can also qualify for. So that would be kind of a short answer.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Marilyn, over to you.
Thank you, Guy. For me, what Julia earlier mentioned also applies to the World Bank in terms of project complexity, etc., and the hugeness of project costs. But in addition to what Julia mentioned, I'll just highlight perhaps one or two items. First is I think there's really a need especially for new firms to really know procurement rules, World Bank procurement rules, and also the requirements for each of the procurement activities that's being launched. Usually, firms in some cases they fail to provide, for instance, very important documents. Being meticulous in some areas, that important documents need to be submitted, or also strengths of the firms need to be highlighted, things like that. So for the World Bank, we just do not look at cost. We look at the value for money. So it's cost, it's quality, it's sustainability, a lot of things. So that's what I can share. Thank you.
No, thank you for that, Marilyn. And I think it's important for us to know, right, that there is this balance in terms of price versus, of course, as you mentioned, sustainability. We hear a lot about ESG and so on. So thank you for that. Over to you, Glenn.
I could probably talk about an hour on this topic.
Go ahead.
But I'll keep it brief. So I think the advice that I'd give is, firstly, understand who's going to be reading your bid documents. So sometimes it's ADB reviewing it, but most often it is the governments of different countries. So you should appreciate, firstly, that although the bid documents may be in English, in many instances, the people that are reading your bid documents are not native English speakers. So you need to keep things very concise and answer the question exactly. So don't write war and peace if you can just write 2 simple bullet points, firstly. Secondly, please appreciate that all of the development banks are very large organizations, and we have thousands upon thousands of contracts and bids happening every year. So we're very systematic. Therefore, if we ask you for something and it's not provided, often we'll just disqualify you. Again, it's a time issue. So going on to the point of value for money and whether it's simply on price, the bid documents itself will articulate whether it's a pass-fail criteria or whether it's a merit point system. So again, depending on your organization and where your strengths are, I think that will guide you in what perhaps you should bid on and what perhaps you shouldn't bid on. If your company or consultancy has a lot of experience, then of course a merit point system is more beneficial. But if you have limited experience, perhaps a pass-fail criteria should be more where you're aiming, because that's a minimum level only that you have to achieve, and after that level, that's completely on price. And the second and last thing I'd say quite quickly is, in terms of ADB, we have a website that articulates between consultancy contracts and civil works contracts and goods contracts. So knowing where to look and how that differs between consultancy contracts, which have a different set of criteria and a different type of procurement as compared to civil works, is also useful. So I think, as my colleague said before, MDBs procure in a very different way than the private sector. So understand the process from our point of view and deliver what is asked in the bid documents precisely and clearly. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Glenn, and to all of you. I mean, I think the words, being meticulous, understanding the process, answering what is being asked, and mindful of who is actually reading the documents are all, I think, fantastic key points for all of us to keep in mind. So thank you so much. Canada is a country that is comprised, largely by SMEs, right? Not large multinational corporations, although we do have them, but by and large it's SMEs. And maybe this speaks perhaps to misconceptions or not of IFIs, but one question that we received was, how big does a company need to be in order to be successful in being considered for some of the works that you are doing? Perhaps Marilyn, I'll start with you. How big does a company have to be?
I think there's no one size fits all in this question. I mean, I saw the bank procuring activities. I mean, consultancies, civil works, and other goods activities, goods that are provided by very small companies, by big companies. It actually depends on what is required by that procurement package. So for consultancy services, we also have small contracts, we have big contracts. It really depends on the package itself. The package would tell us whether that contract, the procurement has to be a large company, or it can be a small company. But for the World Bank, we do not really have like a threshold, because what we look for is really expertise, experience, innovations that can be provided by companies. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn. Is it about the same on your side, Julia?
Yes, exactly. I mean, just to echo what Marilyn was saying, it's really not so much about the size. Of course, it depends on the scope of each tender, but it's really about the experience. And a small company can have an extensive experience in a very particular field that will really outweigh all of the number of staff, the people that they have there. If the team that is assigned to a project can deliver on the specific expectation from the particular activity and tender, then they would be definitely in the rankings of the winners, as opposed to a big company that can dedicate a few people and does not have a strong experience in a specific field.
Great, thank you for that. Makes perfect sense from my perspective. Anything to add, Glenn?
Just that I'd say that maybe 80% of our projects are under $10 million in terms of civil works and goods. But to participate in those tenders, of course, you need to have the liquidity as a company and the audited reports to prove that. So I think, one of the challenges for smaller companies is that they don't have that liquidity that's going to meet the minimum requirement in the bid document. So I think that's one big challenge. But I think in terms of consultancy, either individual consultants or firms, that's less of a challenge. And I think that's more of an open playing field.
Great. Thank you for that. So just looking at the chat box here quickly, we one of the first question that we received this morning or this evening in Canada was from ALTS Canada. I'll just read it out loud and ask our panelists to just jump in. So are the DRR initiatives and projects being aligned with impacted private companies in the context of improving business operational continuity and minimizing business interruptions resulting from the disaster climate event? Are there, I see a smile here from Glenn, so I might ask you to jump in.
My stylistic was, I'm not really sure I understand that question, actually. Can I paraphrase it?
Right. I'm not sure if Mark from ALTS, did you want to try to clarify the question? I'll just ask this if you wanted to jump on the line.
Yes. Yes.
Okay,
thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Sorry. And it was there's a lot of moving parts inside that. So what we're seeing is in a number of risk mitigation and disaster response planning initiatives that infrastructure or resource requirements can be substantial. And private industry in that same geography has a significant incentive to contribute assets for the recovery initiative because their financial loss is substantial. And I'm wondering whether some of these initiatives are aligning with private industry that often have substantial infrastructure and assets that can aid in these response efforts. Does that help?
It does, but I don't think I'm the best person on the panel to answer that question.
Okay.
Julia or Marilyn on your side, or and if not, Mark, what we'll do is we'll take the question back and we'll find the right folks to and get back to you with
Can I provide by way of maybe a bit of an example, if you don't mind?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So in Western Canada, we obviously have common issues in the summer with substantial forest fire. And what you'll have multi-billion-dollar losses related to infrastructure of a significant value, not just the actual forest, but all industry. And you'll have downtime that can be anywhere from 30 days to 120 days. So you'll often see private industry in the area come together and coordinate the availability of bulldozers, backhoes, trucks. I mean, you name it, any fire response, you name it, assets that are very agile, eliminate a remarkable amount of financial burden to have those on standby, but align efforts because they're losing millions of dollars a day in revenue by not helping.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and sorry, that's what we're starting to see more of, and also in the US with certain events that are happening with regards to ice storms in Texas. And so we're seeing an interesting collaboration start to manifest itself with significant financial and companies more collaborating on the agility and fastness, the speed, the rapidity of the response. So I know a lot of times we have the World Bank and Asian Development Bank and everybody kind of operates in maybe in isolation to a certain degree. And that's what I'm trying to understand as to whether you're seeing some of these aspects maybe becoming a little more prevalent or more discussions. Does that help? Thank you very much.
It does on my end in terms of understanding and the concrete example. And any thoughts following that example? Julia?
Maybe, yes. I mean, it's a very interesting example. And I bet that when you go on the ground and speak to the different private sector operators and the different projects that we're doing, they will probably tell us exactly the same conclusions, and they would probably also emphasize the need to engage, participate, and be part of the solution when it comes to immediate disaster responses, or how they can support the government efforts when it comes to immediately helping on the different disaster that are striking the regions on the ground. So it's I think it's a very good observation. What I could perhaps say is, I mean, theoretically, if you're considering projects that help you to address the preparedness of the disasters, because at the end of the day, it all leads to, okay, if there's something that happens, a massive fire or big flooding, there's also different disaster preparedness plans or emergency plans in place that the different governments then need to immediately implement to respond to such activities. And I would be interested to know, but I have to say that I'm not entirely familiar whether those plans take into account, how the private sector can support, participate, and contribute to addressing these different disaster responses. But I'm wondering, maybe Marilyn has some more concrete examples, because she does have a lot of on-the-ground project experience in Philippines.
Thank you, Julia. In the Philippines, we're discussing with government in terms of what you call this pre-disaster arrangements for pre-disaster that involve private sector. The private sector providing the necessary, for instance, debris clearing equipment, that's through what we call as framework agreements, that even before a disaster strikes, there's already a framework agreement that once there's a disaster, private sector can easily come in, bringing with them their resources, because in many cases in disasters in the Philippines, it's always reactive in this area. Government is looking at this. They saw the need, and they saw also the opportunity to really tap the private sector in terms of disaster response and early recovery. While this is what you call this allowed in the government procurement rules, there's still risk averseness in terms of government doing this. But we saw bits and pieces of what we call this experience on the ground done by local governments.
We've had a couple of conversations with the MMDA around trying to start a conversation around how to integrate private industry in the area. And of course, and again, it's not so much about procurement. It was more around kind of being proactive and preparedness.
Yes.
And many of the private organizations have significant assets readily available.
Exactly.
But they're actually not using them because it's not in their core business, but they'd love to contribute them so they can get back to operations as soon as possible. And it could be a substantial financial risk mitigant to that entire economic activity in the area based on the timeliness of response and recovery.
Yes, I agree to that. I think the main challenge here is for government is really to crack that risk awareness.
Yeah. We're seeing the same thing. Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Mark, and also happy to have a side discussion with you after this, and see how the embassy can support in terms of those messages. So really appreciate that. Quickly turning to to another question that we received in the chat box, and I'll read it out loud here. What would be the best approach for a company to conduct a demo of our disaster response mitigation vehicle? Would we host the demo in Canada or ship a unit to Southeast Asia? Excellent question. So to what extent, demonstrations are feasible, and how would one go about that? Glenn, any thoughts on any answers on this?
Demos are great. I would think that the best way forward with this particular organization might be to reach out directly to somebody in one of the organization that's aligned specifically to this type of thing, and have a discussion whether they would down to Canada or having the demo sent here. But I think it's a very, the key to success in this is going to reach out and find that one individual in the organization that is really aligned to this.
Mm-hmm. And Julia.
Well, thanks. I think the best way to use a demo is perhaps to actually deploy the virtual possibility to meet and demonstrate that. So I would perhaps say that you can reach out to the different teams specifically working on the disaster risk financing within our banks. That can maybe be interested to hear about the demo, and then have that as they speak to different projects and see whether they can link you or connect you to the different opportunities that they may be. And again, I think I've spoken to our Infratech platform, which is one of the ways through an event or an activity, or perhaps you could be part of our kind of contacts list in our library, and we can reach out to you when we hear back from any of the interested clients that would be keen to apply such demos. So yes, I think there are definitely some options that we can engage, and feel free to reach out. We'll try to connect you with the relevant people.
Thank you. Anything to add, Marilyn?
In my case, I think I would suggest reaching out to the department or government agency in charge in this in activities like this. Procurement of equipment. It's the decision of the government, so it would be best to reach out to the government agency mandated to procure that kind of equipment. Thank you.
Great. No, thank you for that. And maybe I would just add that this is where our offices, our embassies, right, in the various countries can help facilitate that. So we can certainly have a side discussion on that, and drawing on what I think you mentioned, Glenn, in terms of paying attention to who's actually going to review the documents. The demonstration might be a good also from the IFI perspective, but also the country in which the project is being developed as well. So a great question, and one where I think we can support moving forward from an embassy perspective. I don't see any other questions in the chat function. So I'll ask just a question in terms of trends over the next, let's say, decade or so. When we talk about climate finance, we talk about disaster risk reductions. Of course, that hits so many different sectors, right? We heard about, the energy sector. We hear a lot about climate smart agriculture and so on. Are there any specific sectors where you see an increased focus from your IFI over the next decade or so? So I'll ask you, Julia, if you don't mind to take this one first.
Yes, sure. Thanks. Happy to give some thoughts on this. So I think the two sectors that are mostly severely affected by the disasters is, of course, the water sector and the urban sector, and that's where we see the biggest demand, and I think that will continue. I do want to perhaps come back to one of the questions also posed by the speakers with regards to the changes in trends post-pandemic, and I think there really we're seeing a pickup of the need to address preparedness and kind of the emergency responses in the health sector. So from our point of view, we do see more and more different private sector organizations, equity funds coming to AIIB with requests to invest in social infrastructure, health infrastructure. And I think that that's all linked to the need to prepare for what may come in the future. So most certainly, I think social and health infrastructure sectors would be now in more demand than they were before post-pandemic. I would say absolutely.
Great, thank you. Marilyn, how about yourself?
Okay, so for the Philippines, we just launched the last year the country climate development report. That document identifies the key sectors that are important for climate resilience, and that includes agriculture, water, transport, energy, among other urban sector, among others.
Perfect. No, thank you. And Glenn?
As you pointed out earlier in the presentation, you know, AIIB's got a incredible interest at the moment in working climate resilience and sustainability into all their projects. So in terms of opportunities for consultants, you know, there's been a huge upswing, and we're finding it very difficult to keep up with the demand, you know, to have qualified consultants link into our projects, particularly in those areas of sustainability, climate resilience, but also in sustainable procurement as well. So I think in the last 12 months, especially, we've seen a huge upswing in the demand in those areas. From a global perspective, we've seen an upswing in renewables in the energy fields. So I think those two areas are the trends that I've seen in the last 12 months.
No, great. I think that's very helpful, and it's helpful for, I think, our companies to understand, you know, where the current focus is, but where the current focus may be going over the next decade or so. Listen, we're already at 9:50 our time, and I know that the Canadian ambassador to the Philippines, the Honorable David Hartman, has logged on. Before I turn to him, I'd like to just invite our panelists, if there's any final thoughts, any one word of practical thought or advice, recommendation, takeaway that our companies could take back and reflect on, and you know, something kind of short, high-level message. So anything on your side, Marilyn?
Just one thing for companies to participate in the endeavors of the World Bank. It would really be good to learn more about the priorities of the bank in specific countries, and also the existing initiatives. Thank you. Excellent.
Thank you for that. Glenn?
Not really advice, but just the fact that AIIB acknowledges that the world has changed quite dramatically from procurement perspective in the last 18 months. So we'll be visiting North America, I think Q3 this year, and we'd particularly like to speak to Canadian and American companies to understand and to also try to convince them to participate more in AIIB or MDB projects and consultancy. So we do want to understand the barriers from the consultants and the contractors' bidding point of view. What are the barriers, so that we can perhaps adjust what we're doing to make things a bit easier moving forward. So I look forward to hopefully meeting quite a few Canadian companies in Q3 of this year, or Q4, sorry.
Perfect. And I think we are looking at you know, a possible visit or roadshow, and I think those would be fantastic opportunities to engage directly with our clients back home. And Julia, to close off on the panel discussion, any last minute advice, recommendations, or thoughts on your end?
Well, maybe just two. I want to pick up on what Glenn said. Is we're also looking at the resilience elements of across all of our projects in the AIIB. So there are definitely opportunities when it comes to project preparation, feasibility studies, climate vulnerability assessments. So I think do take a close look on our website, and I'm sure that you will be keen and interested to see the different number of opportunities we have, and we look forward to also engage with you physically on different opportunities there are.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, very much appreciate, your openness, your willingness to not only to participate today, but to engage with us, being through our embassies or directly with Canadian companies. We very much appreciate that. I do want to echo what Don Bobiash, our executive director, mentioned at the beginning in terms of leveraging to all our Canadian companies online, to leveraging the support and services of the IFI liaison offices or OLIFI teams within Canadian embassies in the region for coaching and assistance. We have Kayla Slobodnik for the ADB, Lily Zhu in Beijing for the AIIB, and Leah Johnson for the World Bank in Washington. And of course, working collaboratively with all of our various trade commissioners across our networks globally. I want to quickly mention that the ADB is organizing the Asia Clean Energy Forum in Manila on June 13th to the 16th. And this is an initiative that we here at the Canadian Embassy to the Philippines will be participating in. And so without further delay, I would like to invite Ambassador David Hartman to the virtual stage and to provide our closing remarks. Over to you, Ambassador.
So, well, thank you very much, Guy. Good day to everyone, and thank you for joining us from the region, and good afternoon or good evening to participants from Canada. Mabuhay. And bonjour tout le monde. Je suis ravi d'être ici avec vous aujourd'hui. I trust that everyone has had a very productive webinar. I really do sincerely thank you for being with us today. I'm thrilled that many Canadian companies based in the region and in Canada, as well as many of our colleagues and partners have been able to join the event. These types of events are always of tremendous value. Plus the fact that it's recorded, you can always have it to look back to at a later date. As I'm sure you are likely aware, this is the third IFI Business Opportunities webinar that the Office of the Liaison of International Financial Institutions, or the AIIFI network, of the Canadian Trade Commission Service has brought together virtually. And although business and international travel has resumed for many, a virtual event like today is still valuable to those of you that are clearly based in Canada. And I'd like to express my sincere appreciation to our IFI partners who have generously helped us convene this virtual event. Thank you to our esteemed speakers from the ADB, the World Bank, the AIIB for your time and your support. And I hope this session most poignantly was useful to all of you. My special thanks to Dr. Donald Bobiash, Executive Director of Canada, as well as the Business Opportunities Seminar team from the ADB. As our lead IFI partner, the ADB has extended us access to its BOS series, which made it possible for the AIIFI team to continue delivering IFI BOS events, albeit virtually. Many of you know that Canada launched its Indo-Pacific strategy in November of last year, and you may also notice that the various projects that were announced to support the region in building a sustainable and green future. Some of these include establishing a signature initiative in the region on disaster risk and resilience that enables Canada to help countries adapt to and be ready for the impacts of climate-induced disasters, both before, during, and most importantly, after the disaster strike. Boosting commercial demonstration of Canadian clean technology in priority Indo-Pacific markets, and to help Canada's clean technology small and medium-sized enterprises with financial support to break into the markets in the region, and building on the already announced 1.26 billion Canadian dollars out of the Canada Climate Finance Commitment towards the Indo-Pacific region to assist partner countries with economic recovery and infrastructure needs in order to catalyze inclusive and sustainable development through Canadian capital, Canadian technology, and Canadian policy expertise. So as you can clearly see, there are a lot of mechanisms that we have at our disposal. I was very glad to hear that our colleagues from the Asian Development Bank will be doing a bit of a roadshow in Canada later this year. I think it's very, very important that Canadian companies and industries within our ecosystem do tap in a little bit more definitively, a little bit more poignantly to the opportunities that exist via our participation in the bank. So happy to have the team and I here at the embassy to be able to support you in that. As you also know, Canada currently supports a number of projects with the ADB, including our climate fund for the private sector in Asia. So phase one of this project from 2013 to 2038 We've contributed about $82.4 million. We have a phase 2 of that, another 200 million Canadian dollars for the period from 2017 to 2042. And much of this money aims to yield greater private sector investments in climate change mitigation and adaptation projects in ODA eligible Asian and Pacific countries. So lots and lots of opportunity, and frankly, lots of government support to be able to incentivize Canadian companies to tap into the plethora of opportunity that exists in the region. This fund provides concessional financing alongside AIIB resources, and it helps spur along private sector projects that require more generous terms in order for them to be economically viable. So all of these commitments that I've mentioned today, are very consistent with the themes of today's discussion, and they're well aligned with our priorities of our IFI partners. So I really sincerely encourage you all, with expertise and solutions of climate resilience and disaster risk mitigation, to reflect on, what you've learned today and really try and take advantage, really leverage the opportunities that I hope you've been exposed to perhaps a little bit more definitively today. Please do follow up with our speakers and our trade commissioners to better assess how you and your organization's commercial objectives may contribute to the climate and disaster resilience of the region. There is overwhelming demand here in Canada, in all candor, lots and lots of opportunity to be able to be pursued on. So we know that Canada is a world leader in the development and deployment of cost-effective environmental products and services, and Canadian companies have the relevant technologies and expertise to seize the opportunities that exist with our IFIs. So this is all the more important in the wake of our climate commitments to protect the environment from climate change and climate disaster. So we are very, very committed to this, endeavor for the benefit of, frankly, of all humanity. And I think we, as a country, have sort of put our money where our mouth is, and really do want those companies within our own, commercial ecosystem to try and take advantage of help meeting the needs of the region here within the Indo-Pacific. Excuse me. So as a shareholder of the World Bank, the AIIB, the Asian Investment and Infrastructure Bank, Canada is a very large and significant contributor. We provide about 5.22% of the AIIB's capital subscription. So this membership permits, Canadian companies to compete for contracts related to the procurement opportunities financed by these, by these IFIs. And so, again, I think, certainly within the Canadian government, we want to be able to work with our companies to facilitate their ability to tap into, the opportunity that the Government of Canada facilitates through our IFI partners a little bit more poignantly. The IFI market, I think, as many of you will be well aware, presents opportunities for our businesses interested in expanding, your international portfolio through IFI funded procurement. So we, it is a facilitative exposure to market opportunities, here in the region. And so again, really strongly encourage you to take advantage of that opportunity. Our OLIFI team here in Manila, in Beijing, and Washington, as well as our climate finance officer for the Asia Pacific, the Indo-Pacific, are able to provide guidance, coaching, assistance to you as you build your IFI business development plan for the region. So again, please do continue to follow up with my colleagues and I, and take advantage of the opportunity that we have hopefully, made you more aware of today. And just lastly, please do leverage the on-the-ground networks that exist here and that they're available to you. And you can really build a solid track record and experience coming and making yourselves available to pursue opportunities with partners here in the region is a very viable and very important approach. And again, the entire ecosystem support that is available to our private sector partners to be able to facilitate access to this market opportunity here is one that we're only too happy to be able to introduce you to. So again, thank you very much for joining today. And I now hand the virtual mic back to the team. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Hartman. On behalf of the Trade Commissioner Service Offices of IFIs, on behalf of the Trade Commissioner Service Offices for the Zone with IFIs, I'd like to thank all of our speakers for your generous support today to share your knowledge and your insights with us. Thank you also to everybody for your participation and contribution to the discussion. As you have heard, the post-event survey will be sent after the event, and upon completion, you will be directed to a link for event recording and materials. You are, of course, encouraged to reach out to our offices for any additional information or follow-up. We look forward to seeing you at our next IFI Business Opportunities event. I wish everybody a good morning, afternoon, and evening. Goodbye.